Hello everyone and welcome to Stitch Bliss Corner. Mary Rose here. Hello to my subscribers, to you if you've come here for the first time. Welcome to you as well. And today I'm going to be talking about the Bayeux Tapestry. And I think anyone, particularly stitchers, who see this work are quite enchanted by it and amazed by it and stunned by it. So I shall be talking about that a little bit later. And also I have a few comments that I want to address before I go on. So Lisa Bergen, who does videos herself and is an excellent stitcher, and she chronicles her work as she goes through, so that she tells you how many hours that she... Oh, here goes a helicopter over me. She chronicles her stitching so that you roughly know how many hours she spent on each piece, which can be very helpful if you're thinking of doing something that size, or if you're thinking of stitching the piece that she's doing. So anyway, you know, if you get a chance, have a look at her videos. And she mentioned that you can, apart from getting programs that will give you a chart on the computer, the ones that I was mentioning, she said you can also get ones from photographs called Stitcher photograph kind of programs. And I remembered that I had one too, a Stitcher photo. And this one, they're a bit more simple than, you know, I mean, the programs that I was showing on my last video were for really detailed pictures that you might want to reproduce, that you like to think about if you're interested in something a little bit less technical, shall we say. Now, the other thing I was going to say was Mary Weeks. She put a comment in and she said that she works on 14 and 16 count Ada, and she was wondering about half stitches, how I do them on the bigger count, and also for couching to get a curve on larger Ada. Basically, what do I do? And so I thought I'd just attempt to show Mary what I do. Now, I don't use a sharp, dull needle when I'm doing quarter stitches or half stitches on Ada. I use a sharp needle because it is very difficult to pierce the centre of Ada fabric with a dull needle. I mean, it's just making a rod for your own back, really, isn't it? I mean, so if you use a sharp needle, it's very easy. I mean, I've done a couple of half stitches there and they were simplicity itself. I mean, if you go through the centre of your Ada using the sharp needle, you can very easily go down through the side hole there of your square, and then come through and make your half stitch without any problems. Now, I have been known, if I'm doing work on Ada, to use this end, the end with the eye, to make my crosses, so that I don't have to... I mean, if you're careful with the sharp end, you have to be careful you don't prick your finger, but it's really not that hard to do that. And you can use the dull eye end to actually do your cross stitch. So if you're doing an edge where you're doing a lot of quarter stitches and some crosses, you don't really have to change your needle to a dull needle. You can actually still use that end to do those crosses. and then turn it to use the sharp end to do your quarter stitches or your half stitches or whatever you're doing. Okay, so that's that hint or suggestion from me. And then she was mentioning, Mary was mentioning, about going round a curve using the couching on larger whole Aida cloth. Now, I would suggest that the best way of doing that is to basically ignore the Aida holes that you have. If they come in the right position, well, of course, use them for your couching. Excuse me a moment. Licking the floss. I'm just getting my upper stitch ready. So, naturally enough, if you're working on Aida, your holes, or any, Aida fabric, they're going to go and want to go in a straight line. So there's no way that you can do a curve and use the holes exclusively, because you're not going to get a curve. So what I do is, if the hole is in the correct position on my curve, well, of course I'll use it. So I'll come up through the existing Aida hole. Now I'm using the sharp end at the moment just to show you, but I could use the dull end through the actual Aida hole. Okay. Then when I come to a section where it's going to be a curve there, but there isn't a corresponding hole, I'm just going to go through where I want my curve. So I'll just get that in the right spot. So for example, just there, that's not in an Aida hole, it's just through the fabric, I've pierced it. I bring it out, and as long as I return it to the same hole that I came up through, my curve is going to form. So that's my suggestion to you is, Mary, that rather using your dull needle if you're going around a curve with your couching, just use one with a point on it. And then you can make that edge go anywhere you like, because you're the boss. You're the one that puts the hole in there. Okay? So I hope that's helpful to you, because that's what I do. Now the other thing I had to show you was a finish that I've done. It's from this series, Discovering Needlecraft, but it's not from this issue. It's just so I can show you what the magazine looked like. And it's the Harlequin. I finished him. Now I have done some alterations to him. Here, this is a love letter that Harlequin had. Well, I've changed that. It's not a love letter because I'm doing it for my husband, and he does my charts for me on the computer. That's a chart that he's done for me. I was thinking of putting a little Harlequin on there, but I thought I really have spent so much time and I want to get back to the Scout. So I've done hair. I used couching for his hair. I did 1/1 for his skin, which I always do. That hand looks a bit small, but I think it does sort of work. And then on his hat, I just put a little extra, a variation of the hair tail that the Harlequin traditionally had. And I put a little bit of decoration on his hat. And the next time you see him, he'll be in a frame. So that's Harlequin. Now then, how to cover the Bayeux Tapestry. It's not easy. But I think maybe I should just tell you a little bit about it, and then I'll just backtrack a little bit about how it came about. That might be the best idea. So just bear with me for a moment. It's the most famous picture strip in the world. The Bayeux record is a large roll of historical drawings rather than a piece of tapestry. Well, it traditionally is called a tapestry, but as you probably already know, it isn't a tapestry. But I think it just came into a common usage of that's what it was called. So, but lately historians are calling it embroidery. It commemorates the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Now, a bit more about it here. It's 230 feet long, that's 70 metres, and roughly a metre wide or tall. It's written in Latin, and the interesting thing about it was even if you couldn't read Latin, you could certainly see the sequence of events by looking at it. So the people had a chance to actually view the events in order, in sequence, even if they couldn't read. I'll tell you a little bit more about it shortly, but I thought I'd just talk about the protagonists of the time, and then as I go through the pictures, I have some beautiful pictures from this fabulous book, the Bayeux Tapestry. Then anything else I'll mention as I go through. Now, it was the 11th century, and what happened was, in England, Edward the Confessor was on the throne, and he was a very pious man. He used to build a lot of churches and things. But he was coming towards the end of his life. Now, he happened to be the cousin of William of Normandy. And William, it was a duchy, Normandy at the time. It was part of France, but there'd been a treaty. Oops, Harlequin's moving about. I'll just put him down here. There was a treaty that allowed Normandy to be a duchy and have not a king, because France had a king, but a duke that used to run it. And William, who was the one that fought the Battle of Hastings, his father, Robert, went on a pilgrimage and he died on the way back. I think he was in his 30s. And William inherited the duchy when he was about 8. But naturally enough, he couldn't take it then. But there were many years of upheaval and strife that he had to survive to get to his adulthood. And he did survive and became Duke of Normandy. And meantime, over in England, the Romans had basically gone, and when they went, the Vikings from the north parts, they came over and invaded, and some of them, originally they came just to take what they could and leave in their longboats, but eventually some of them settled and wanted to stay. And so they sort of interspersed with the Celts. So you had the Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes all came from the Scandinavian areas, Norway and Denmark, and that was sort of the Viking territory, Iceland. And so life just went on. And when Edward the Confessor died, then Harold Godwinson was one of the top nobles in England. And the people in England didn't really want a foreign king, even though Edward the Confessor, who was William's cousin, had basically said that the throne could go to William. And Harold had actually, they're not quite sure what happened, but Harold was supposed to have been in a boat at some stage, and it came to Normandy. And while he was there, he swore fealty to William, that he gave his allegiance to him. So, but then again, he was sort of like William's prisoner at the time, because he was, you know, in a foreign country. So he was basically going to say anything that would get him back home, I should imagine. So when Harold left Normandy and went back to England, and Edward the Confessor died, Harold thought, well, you know, I would like to be king. So he declared himself as king. Now, meanwhile, William, back in Normandy, was not happy about this, because as far as he was concerned, he was Edward's cousin, and he had the right to the crown. So Harold, while he was getting himself sorted out, another person claimed the throne, and he was Hardrada. I've just got a picture of him here. A Viking. There he is, the last Viking king. He decided that he was going to come over and try and take the crown. So he invaded, and Harold had to go up there. He was waiting, actually, down in the lower parts of England for William to turn up. But he couldn't wait any longer, because Hardrada had turned up in the York area, which is up north. So Harold had to go up there and fight at Stamford Bridge. And he defeated Hardrada there. Stamford Bridge. Now let me have a look. I think he said something at the time. Oh, I might come to that later. I've got so many. Harold Godwinson said, when asked what Hardrada's fate would be, he said 7 foot of English soil, or as much more as he is taller than other men. So anyway, Harold did defeat him. So he was on a high, because he'd gone up there and he'd vanquished the enemy and one of his rivals. And it took 3 weeks for him and his men to get back down to Hastings, waiting for William to turn up. And when they got down to Hastings, they chose a good position up high on a ridge, which was all well and good, but they were tired. I mean, they'd just had a big battle. And when they placed themselves, they had these big round shields that they put in front of themselves on this hill. And then behind that, they had the other men with their big axes, and they were massive big axes. They could basically chop a human in half and bring a horse down and mutilate them, you know. So they had a lot of power in that way. But that's all they had. They had rocks and they had axes, and they had their shields at the front to ward off any person trying to take their position. Now William, on the other hand, he had archers, he had his infantry behind the archers, the fighters, the swords and everything, and then behind that he had an elite group of men on horseback, because William had managed to persuade the Pope that his cause was the true one. And with the Pope's support, because the Normans were very piously Catholic, and William's half-brother, Odo, he was a bishop as well. So anyway, with that support, many professional soldiers on horses came from across, from southern Italy, from France and other parts, to boost William's numbers. So anyway, I'll get to the book shortly. The day of the battle, William and his men were heading off up the hill. So of course they had the inferior position, because everybody knows in a battle it's good to be at the top, where Harold was. But what William did was he got his archers to fire their arrows just to thin out the English ranks a bit, which did work, but it didn't make a marked impression on the English army, but it did take some of them out, because they put their shields up to stop the arrows. Then his infantry went up the hill, and they were constantly repelled. They couldn't get past those shields that were all across the front, like a Roman phalanx. That's where they learnt to do that. And then, as the battle raged on, some of the men on William's side thought that he'd died, and William ended up, because 2 horses were shot and were taken from under him in the battle, and William had to show, and there's a picture in the tapestry of him doing it, show his face to show that he was still king. And he said, I will conquer this day, with God's help and all this sort of thing. I can still win, basically. And because it looked as though William might have gone, and they're not quite sure whether he did this, pretended he was dead, so that the English on the top of the hill would think, oh great, we'll advance now. No, the historians aren't quite sure. Or whether the ones on the hill thought, oh, he's gone, so we'll head off. They came down the hill against Harold's orders. Harold told them to hold ranks, and one side didn't hold rank. They progressed down the hill in their exuberance, and of course when that happened, then William's cavalry, the men on the horses, came up the hill, went round the back of the flank, and decimated the English ranks when they did that. So the combat was fierce. It raged all day long, and apparently they were at such close quarters that when someone was dead, they couldn't actually drop, because there was so much density of people fighting one against the other. And Harold eventually got an arrow through his eye, and when they saw that their king was dead, then, naturally enough, the heart was lost, basically, in the fight. But some historians say that even though the king was dead, the Englishmen didn't leave, because that was not considered to be right at the time. You died. If your king died, you did as well. But I should imagine there would have been some that just ran away. So anyway, that was the Battle of Hastings. And now, here are a few things to go with that. One is that William's wife was called Matilda, and she was the daughter of Henry I of Germany. And she wasn't too keen on William when she first met him. In fact, he tried to woo her for 7 years. She was keen on an Anglo-Saxon who did not return her affection, apparently. So anyway, William got fed up with her rejecting his advances, because she said she was too good for him, basically. And, she didn't want to waste her time with someone like him. But one day when she was coming home from church on her horse, William came up to her, grabbed her by the braids, you know how they had the braids, pulled her off her horse and threw her in the mud and rolled her around in the mud and ruined all her fine clothes, and then whacked her a couple of times for good measure. And rather than thinking, oh, well, she's not going to have anything to do with him, she actually felt that it showed how much he loved her, and she softened towards him, and she married him. So while he was away at the Battle of Hastings, she was consort in Normandy and looking after things. And there are two theories about why the Bayeux Tapestry was stitched. One was that Matilda wanted to show her love for William by stitching it. The other one was that William's half-brother Odo commissioned it because he had the wherewithal, the resources to assemble the designers to put the tapestry together, you know, to chronicle it correctly. So it's very difficult to work out which is correct. Now, I'll just tell you a little bit more about the tapestry and then I'll show you the pictures. Matilda was assisted by her own court and English ladies to stitch the Bayeux Tapestry, and it was preserved in the Cathedral of Bayeux. And just a note about William's brother Odo, because he was a bishop, he was not allowed to spill Christian blood, but he was still in the battle. He used a mace and he was just whacking people over the head with the mace. It is considered to be a vital piece of evidence for the history of the 11th century. Let's see. It says Matilda could not mount a horse and do battle on a battlefield, but she did commit his exploits to the tapestry. There were doubts as to who instigated the tapestry because there are no gold threads or silver threads in it. It's all wool. But somebody must have had the resources because, I mean, it was on a lot of different pieces of linen that were, you know, I mean, you can't just, poor people couldn't do that. So it was obviously commissioned by someone. There. Matilda was crowned Queen of England on the 11th of May, 1068 at Westminster Abbey. Matilda and William had 10 children. William is said to have had no illegitimate children, and one of the reasons for that was because William was the illegitimate son of Robert, the Duke, and I think that might have cut quite deeply because he was called William the Bastard until he was called William the Conqueror. I think he preferred William the Conqueror. And Matilda was only 4 foot 2 inches when her skeleton was examined in 1819, which made her one of the shortest queens of England. Covered that. Just going through here. And the tapestry has survived so well because William's brother rolled it up and kept it in the Bayeux Cathedral, and it was kept safe for many centuries. Even then, the last bit is missing. I don't know what happened to that. And it says here, the manifest object of the Bayeux Tapestry is to prove the right of William to the throne of England, to exhibit in strong colours the undutifulness and ingratitude of Harold in attempting the usurpation of the crown, and to record the punishment with which that disloyal and sacrilegious act was visited. Right, now I'll just go on to this little bit here, and then we can have a look at the beautiful stitching. The number of figures in the work: there are 623 men, 202 horses, 55 dogs, 505 other animals, 37 buildings, 41 ships and boats, 49 trees, a total of 1,512 figures. Although the actual stitching of the work was down to the ladies of Matilda's court, draftsmen may well have designed much of it. The priests were the principal artists of that day. The style of the work suggests the artist was an Italian. The postures were seen as Italian rather than English or French. And that is from the Lives of the Queens of England, written in 1853 by Miss Agnes Strickland, of whom it was said, is rather indignant that anyone who has not learned to cross-stitch should venture to discuss the subject. And she said, before we argue, she wants to know if we can sew. That was the historians at the time. In 1803, Napoleon, first consul of France, took the tapestry from Bayeux to the National Museum in Paris. But now it is in Bayeux. It's all around the room, and you can see it all. It measures 227 feet in length and the breadth 20 inches. The groundwork is a strip of fine linen cloth. The stitches consist of lines coloured, worsted, laid side by side, and bound down at intervals with cross fastenings. The parts intended to represent flesh, the face, hands, and naked legs of the men, are left untouched by the needle. It is in remarkable condition considering its age. Chief colours used are dark and light blue, red, pink, yellow, buff, and dark and light green. Perspective and light and shade are disregarded, a bit like Lowry disregarded that. Colour is changed if there is confusion. For example, a horse's leg colour might be different if it is the same colour as a man's. Same colour as a man's top, to avoid confusion. The principal subject occupies the central position of the tapestry, but the borders have all sorts of creatures that never came out of Noah's Ark, griffins, centaurs, etc. Another part of the border has representations from Aesop's fables, the crow and the fox, the wolf and the lamb, and the crane and the wolf, the eagle and the tortoise. The whole picture is divided into 72 compartments, scenes which are usually separated from each other by trees. There is usually an inscription for each scene in Latin. The letters, like the figures, are stitched in worsted and about an inch in length. And there's a little bit more about it before I show you the pictures. Laid embroidery stitches. Now, a laid embroidery stitch is a square laid filling stitch. It's a composite stitch used to fill areas in counted thread, crewel work, etc. To work the stitch, a ground of vertical and horizontal intersecting threads is laid on the fabric. Couching is also used to create groundwork. So the outlines, they use stem stitch for lettering and outlines of figures, and couching for the laid work and for filling in figures. Now, worsted is a fine smooth yarn spun from combed long staple wool, and staple wool is a naturally formed cluster of wool fibres, not a single fibre. Right, I think it's enough facts and figures. Get on to the book now. Now, it does show the part where Harold is blown off course in his ship and ends up in Normandy and swearing his fealty and then going back. I'm not showing that part of the tapestry because this video would go on forever if I did that. So I'm just starting out at Westminster Abbey with Harold's crowning as English king. William saw Harold as a traitorous upstart because he'd sworn his fealty to William and then he went back and declared himself as king. So here's the picture of Harold declaring himself king in Westminster Abbey. See beautiful stitching there. I hope I'm showing it all. This is David M. Wilson. Comprehensive book. Then on the next page, the people's reaction to Harold being declared king, and Halley's comet was seen, which was considered to be a bad omen. But bear in mind, the victors were the ones that stitched this, so of course they're going to show anything that's a bad harbinger. And if you look up here, that is Halley's comet. And just for reference, there's Halley's comet. I've got some pictures here. Just the filling stitches. And there's another one here. That's not the Bayeux Tapestry, but just to show some filling stitching and couching. So. Right, so the next bit, of course there are all those panels, I'm just showing you pieces of them. Messengers sent to William that Harold had been crowned King of England. So here are the messengers going over to Normandy and telling William the bad news. So William, it says, William ordered trees to be cut down to build ships to invade England. Edward the Confessor was his second cousin, and he felt he had the greater claim to the throne. So here is where all the trees are being cut down to build the ships. And there they are building all the ships. I mean, you could look at that stitching all day long, couldn't you? That's unbelievable. Now, boats are loaded with chainmail, weapons, helmet and horses. And the chainmail, you've got the men carrying the chainmail and the horse and the swords. You see the chainmail there. And they have reenactments of the Battle of Hastings. People come from all over the world to take part in it. And they all bring their chainmail, and they're expected to dress as closely to accurate as they possibly can. And here you can see some of the horses on the ships. Took about, I don't know, 8 to 10 hours to get across the channel. Something like that. I'll just keep that in there because I have a reason to mark that spot. I'll come back to it. Right, now then. Then it just shows the food preparation when they got over to Pevensey near Hastings. And it just showed that looks like a chicken on just there on a skewer that they cooked on fires. And of course you've got all these motifs above and below as it goes through. Then here, a feast is provided for William and Odo is in attendance. So there's the feast being provided, and William is there, and that is Odo, and you see the servant there serving at the table. So they were very well provisioned, ready for their battle, unlike Harold, who'd just been on a 3-week march. Now there's a flag here that the Pope provided for William for his cause, and that's that there, that's the Pope flag. Just get on to the now we're into the battle here. So I'll just get there's some of the battle scene there, and you know there are quite a few sections with them all fighting and arrows going through the air and legs and arms being chopped off and all the rest of it in the midst of the battle. And then this page here is the one I was talking about, where William shows his face there to show that he's still alive. Then there are 2 images of Harold when he's killed. The first one, like, is there where he gets the arrow through the eye, and then the other one is there where he's probably off his horse and they're dealing with him. And they said that he was basically hacked to pieces, and the way he was identified was one of his lovers knew part of his body that no one else knew about, markings, and she identified him. But as you can see, a monumental piece of work. Stitching. Stitching has made a hugely important record with incredible accuracy. They said that they knew it was stitched around the time that it happened, because after that time falcons used to have little hoods over their eyes, and all of the birds in the Bayeux Tapestry, there's none of them with the hoods on their eyes. So they know that it was pretty much stitched very close to the time of the Battle of Hastings. Now, was there anything else I had to tell you? I think that was pretty much all I had to say about that. I did do a bit of stitching for... Oh, that's right, I was going to show you that page, wasn't I? The one I marked out, that I probably lost the spot now. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'll show you the other picture here. Oh, here's the map, just to show you. This book has got absolutely everything. Pevensey and Hastings and Normandy. So that's where he landed, Pevensey and Hastings, and there's Brittany down there. And of course it doesn't show York, but York is way up here somewhere where Harold had to come down from to fight. And the stitching on that, there's figures there. That's William Harold. I'm not quite sure whether that's the two protagonists or whether it just happens to have their writing there, but amazing. And here is the book I stitched a piece on. I've taken it out of the frame for today just to show you. Medieval cross-stitch samplers. And I can't show the actual stitching. I can show you my stitching, but the picture of the stitching isn't here. It's just the actual chart. But that is the section of the embroidery that the stitching is taken from, which I did have marked in the book, but it seems to have slipped. So, but anyway, that's what it looks like. And there was my simple little bit of stitching there. But of course, I'd like to do much more intricate work than that. It was just, I mean, I don't like things that aren't finished off, you know. I wouldn't just do half a boat. But there is a horse in there. Yeah. Well, that was a walk through the Bayeux Tapestry. There is a copy of it. I think it's in Reading in England that you can go and see. But we do owe a lot to those stitches in that time that they did such beautiful work. I suppose I could just quickly see if I can find, you know how they mentioned about the horse's legs being a different colour, if there was something, if it was confusing in any way against another background. Well, I think there is. What have we got here? If you can see there where the horses do have different coloured legs, but it all works so well. Right, well, all of these are on the internet, the different pages you can have a look at anyway. So I don't think I've put it together quite as coherently as I would have liked. But then again, it's not a history lesson really, but it was really just to put it into context, so that when you're looking at the stitching, you have a bit of an idea of what was going on around that time. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. I shall catch you again next time, and that's all for today from Stitch Bliss Corner. Bye for now.